It was a summer day in 1347 when the world of medieval Europe began to change forever. In the small, busy trading ports of Italy, the first signs of a terrible disease began to appear. People didn't know it yet, but this disease, which would become known as the Black Death, would take the lives of millions, shake society to its core, and change the future of Europe forever. At first, the signs were subtle. Merchants from the east, returning from the Crimea, began to unload their goods in Messina's busy port. They brought with them not just exotic wares, but something far worse: a plague. As the first cases emerged, the city was thrown into panic. The sailors, their bodies covered in painful blackened swellings, dropped dead within days. In their wake, panic spread like wildfire through the population. People were terrified, not knowing what caused the disease or how to protect themselves. Soon, the plague reached the mainland, traveling rapidly across Italy, France, and Spain. It moved quickly and without mercy, sparing neither the rich nor the poor. Within months, it had spread across Europe, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. As the death toll mounted, a new and strange figure began to appear in the streets: the plague doctor. These men, often hired by towns and villages to treat the sick, became a symbol of both fear and hope. The plague doctor was easily recognized by his distinctive outfit: a long, waxed coat, gloves, and boots, all designed to protect him from the miasma, what was believed to be the bad air causing the disease. The most striking feature of the plague doctor's attire was the long, beak-like mask. Inside the mask, doctors placed sweet-smelling herbs, spices, or aromatic substances like vinegar, hoping to ward off the foul-smelling air they believed caused the plague. However, the reality of the plague doctor's role was far from comforting. They had no understanding of the plague's true cause. Instead, they relied on medieval treatments that were largely ineffective. Plague doctors would often bleed their patients, apply poultices made from herbs, or even use fire to purge the disease. These treatments did little to save the lives of those infected. The plague doctors themselves, despite their efforts to protect themselves, often fell victim to the disease. In every corner of Europe, the Black Death was indiscriminate in its fury. The rich and poor, the young and old, all fell victim. Entire families were wiped out in a matter of days. In some villages, not a single soul was left alive. The devastation was so widespread that it left entire regions deserted, with only the ghosts of the dead remaining behind. The wealthiest of society, who believed they could escape the plague by retreating to the safety of their country estates, soon discovered that no place was truly safe. The plague spread across Europe with terrifying speed, and even the most remote areas weren't spared. The very foundations of society began to crack as the death toll rose. The poor were not only struck by the plague, but also by the collapse of the systems they depended on. With so many dead, fields went untended, crops withered, and famines set in. Starving people, already weakened by the plague, were left to fend for themselves. Many died not from the disease, but from hunger and the harsh conditions that followed. But it wasn't only the common folk who suffered. The clergy, seen by many as the guardians of faith, were also swept away by the plague. Monasteries were emptied, and priests, monks, and nuns who had once been the caretakers of the sick now found themselves fighting for their own lives. In the face of this unimaginable loss, some people turned to religion for solace, while others began to question their faith. As the Black Death spread, one of the most horrifying problems emerged: the disposal of the bodies. In some cities, the death toll was so high that traditional burial practices could not keep up. In London, for example, it was said that entire neighborhoods were abandoned, with bodies left to rot in the streets. Mass graves were dug, and bodies were piled on top of each other, sometimes as many as 1,000 at a time. In many cases, people had no choice but to abandon the dead. Those who had survived struggled to cope with the sheer number of corpses. In some areas, bodies were thrown into rivers or discarded in pits outside the cities. The stench of death filled the air, and the sight of the dead lining the streets became commonplace. In some places, people were forced to live in their homes with the bodies of their loved ones, too afraid to approach the deceased for fear of contracting the plague. The cities, once teeming with life, now stood silent, their streets filled with the remnants of a vanished population. The Black Death did not spare even the most powerful of men. Kings, nobles, and high-ranking officials, once thought to be immune to such a fate, fell victim to the plague just like the common folk. One of the most shocking and tragic deaths was that of the Black Prince, Edward III's son. The Black Prince, a man admired for his bravery and leadership, was not only the heir to the English throne, but also a symbol of military might. However, in 1376, he succumbed to the plague, leaving England without its brightest star. His death was devastating to his father, King Edward III, who had already been weakened by years of war and illness. The loss of the Black Prince at such a young age created a leadership vacuum in England, and it would take years for the country to recover from both the plague and the absence of such a respected figure. Similarly, in France, King John II, known as John the Good, was another notable victim of the plague. After being captured by the English during the 100 Years' War, King John was ransomed and returned to France, but his health had deteriorated. It is believed that he too died as a result of the plague in 1364, shortly before his passing. His death left France in political chaos, struggling to rebuild from the devastation of the Black Death and the ongoing war with England. For many, the plague was a terrifying reminder of their mortality. Some believed the end of the world was near, while others turned to prayer and penance, hoping to appease God's wrath. But some groups, particularly the Flagellants, took things to an extreme. These people wandered from town to town, whipping themselves in public displays of repentance, hoping to end the plague by showing their devotion. Others, however, took a darker view. Anti-Semitic sentiments flared, with Jews often being blamed for the outbreak. In some parts of Europe, entire Jewish communities were slaughtered or driven from their homes, with people falsely accusing them of poisoning the wells and causing the disease. As the plague began to fade, the surviving population was left to pick up the pieces. Whole towns had been abandoned, and entire villages had been wiped off the map. The social and economic systems that had existed for centuries were shattered. In the aftermath of the plague, society began to change. One of the most significant effects of the Black Death was its impact on the feudal system. With so many peasants and serfs dead, those who survived found themselves in a position of power. Workers could demand higher wages, and many peasants fled their lands to seek better opportunities in cities. This shift in the balance of power would help sow the seeds for the social and economic changes that would come in the centuries to follow. The impact on the church was also significant. While religion remained an important part of life for many, the plague caused people to question the church's authority. Some turned to new forms of spirituality, while others looked to secular leaders for guidance. The Black Death had weakened the power of the church and helped pave the way for the Renaissance, a period of intellectual and artistic rebirth that would forever change Europe. The Black Death did more than just claim the lives of millions. It left an indelible mark on the culture, economy, and society of Europe. The fear and horror of the plague would shape the way people viewed life and death for generations. The survivors were forever changed, scarred by the memories of those they had lost and the suffering they had witnessed.